It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. No red carpets, no flashing cameras, just nature, silence, and some much-needed solitude. Tobey Maguire had accepted the invite to a countryside charity retreat almost on impulse, craving a kind of stillness that had become foreign in the Hollywood blur of schedules and obligations. The estate sat beside a forgotten lake, veiled most mornings by a thick mist that curled over its surface like breath on glass. There was something ancient in the way the trees leaned in, their branches casting long reflections over the still water. Locals called it Mirror Lake, though some joked it reflected more than just your face. On the third morning, Toby woke early, before the light broke fully over the horizon. He patted down a gravel path in sweatpants and an old hoodie, coffee steaming in one hand, and wandered to the water's edge. And then he heard it. A piano. Soft, distant, like it was being played underwater. He froze. The notes were not modern. No jazz, no pop, no improvisation. They were classical, structured, fragile, a melody that seemed half remembered from a dream. He scanned the fog-drenched lake, but no boat, no house, no floating speaker could be seen. Just ripples on the surface, and silence as soon as he stepped closer. By the time he returned to the estate, he wasn't sure he had actually heard it. Later that day, during brunch with the other guests, he casually brought it up. "You ever hear music out by the lake?" he asked the group. The table fell quiet. An older woman, one of the retreat organizers, set her teacup down slowly. "Locals say the lake sings sometimes," she said with a half smile. "Old superstition. It's nothing." "But have you heard it?" She hesitated, eyes darting toward the window before shaking her head. "No, it's just the wind through the reeds." But Toby wasn't convinced. That night, long after the fire pit had gone cold and the laughter died down, he returned to the lake. He brought nothing with him. No phone, no flashlight, just himself and the sound of the reeds rustling in the wind. He waited. And just past midnight, when the moon broke through a slit in the clouds, he heard it again. The same melody, only this time the notes trembled slightly, like they were being played by hands that hadn't touched a piano in years. And then, a splash. Something surfaced briefly in the fog, glinting in the moonlight before vanishing once more beneath the black water. Toby stood there, barefoot on the dew-covered grass, feeling something in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. It was a pull, like someone, somewhere, was asking him to listen, to remember, to find something that had been buried a long time ago. The following morning, the lake lay still as glass under a pale sky. Toby returned alone. Camera crew politely kept at bay by a fabricated excuse. Just going for a run. But he wasn't here to jog. He brought a pair of waders borrowed from the groundskeeper and slowly stepped into the icy water, determined to prove that he hadn't imagined it. His breath caught as his foot struck something solid just beneath the surface. Wooden, worn, and unmistakably shaped. A piano. Half buried in silt, its warped frame clung to the lakebed like a forgotten relic. Waterlogged keys jutted out in angles, algae trailing off the edges like seaweed from a shipwreck. The lid was missing, and around its broken legs, something glinted in the muck. Toby reached down, fingers brushing against the soft bundle wedged under one of the broken petals. Something wrapped in aged cloth and tied with brittle string. He pulled it free with care, heart racing, then turned back toward the shore. Wrapped inside the damp fabric was a diary, its leather cover cracked and buckled, the pages yellowed and swollen. Faded ink still clung to the paper in elegant, slanted cursive. On the inside cover was a name written twice. L4 Lane 4, October 1939. Back inside the guest house, Toby spread the diary out on a towel near the fireplace and began reading. October 12, 1939. They've conscripted everyone in my conservatory class, even Henri. But I told them I'd rather fight with a melody than a rifle. They laughed, of course. They always do. Cowards don't belong on battlefields, they said. Maybe that's true, but this is my battlefield. The entries continued. A young French composer, barely 20, torn between the call of war and the pursuit of music. Toby's fingers traced the ink as if trying to touch time itself. The story unfolded slowly. Leon Farr had fled occupied France and been brought to England as a refugee. He was offered a remote cottage to compose in peace, donated by a British benefactor who believed music could heal the wounds of war. The retreat, Toby realized with a chill, was the very estate he was now staying on. Leon's final entries took a darker turn. He wrote of hearing gunfire in his dreams, of unfinished scores, and of being watched. He spoke of a composition he poured all of himself into, his magnum opus, titled Nocturne for the Lost. Then, the entries stopped, abruptly. The final page bore only one sentence. If no one hears it, does the song still exist? Toby sat for a long time with that question, the diary in his lap, the firelight flickering across the torn pages. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the melody haunting him in soft fragments, like someone trying to play it from memory inside his head. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, Toby called in a favor. He reached out to a composer friend in London, someone with the skill to decipher waterlogged pages and reconstruct broken music. By evening, the two were huddled over the diary at a small, upright piano in the Manor's parlor. The musician turned each fragile page like a relic, squinting at half-erased notations and broken bars. "It's all here," the composer whispered, "scattered and incomplete. But it's here, like a ghost waiting to be heard again." Over the next 2 days, the two men painstakingly transcribed and reassembled what they could of Nocturne for the Lost. The score was fragmented, half verses, entire measures missing. Yet something miraculous began to emerge from the silence, aching, resilient, and impossibly beautiful. And in the margins of one page, scribbled hastily, was a note: "Play it over the lake, that's where it belongs." Toby stood at the shore the next evening, watching as a portable keyboard was set up facing the water. A few guests gathered nearby, uncertain why they'd been invited. When the first notes played, soft and bersodov, trembling, full of longing, "I wait for me," the lake held its breath. The wind stopped. Even the birds fell silent, and for the first time in 80 years, the melody floated across the water, no longer just a memory or a whisper in the fog, but a living voice carried by hands that still believed in the power of unfinished dreams. Toby closed his eyes. He could almost feel Leon beside him, head bowed in quiet thanks. But the story wasn't finished. Not yet. There was still one more chapter to uncover. The applause faded gently into the night. The last note of Nocturne for the Lost still hung in the mist, trembling like a soul released. The lake was quiet again, moonlight glazing its surface like liquid silver. Toby stood in silence, staring out across the water, the cool breeze brushing past him like a memory whispering goodbye. But inside, something had changed. That melody, its ache, its defiance, its unfinished longing, had opened something deeper than nostalgia. It wasn't just Leon Forrest's story that had haunted the lake. It was every forgotten voice, every dream that died unheard, every truth the world chose not to remember. And Toby couldn't walk away now. Not without finding the ending Leon never got to write. Back inside the retreat's grand manor, he revisited the diary for clues he may have missed. One smudged detail in the margins caught his eye. A note scribbled quickly between two bars of music. "Ask Miss Carradine. She knows." He took the name to the local archives the next day, a quiet stone building nestled between a bookshop and a florist in the nearest village. After hours of combing through brittle newspaper clippings and faded registration logs, he found her. Eleanor Carradine, age 102, former music teacher, now living in a care home barely a mile from the retreat. Toby drove there in silence, the road winding like a thread through the past. When he met her, white-haired, eyes sharp despite the years, she studied him long before she spoke. "You've been to the lake," she said without being told. Toby nodded. "I found the piano and the diary." Her hands trembled as she reached for the leather-bound book. When she opened it, she drew in a breath as though time had leaped backward. "I was the only one who believed in him," she whispered. "Leon wasn't just a composer. He was a soul the war tried to erase." She told Toby everything. Leon Forrest had lived in the cottage overlooking the lake, sent there by a society of artists trying to protect young talents from the war's reach. Eleanor had been his only visitor, a young pianist herself, delivering groceries and exchanging music. He confided in her, called her his muse, even taught her how to play pieces of the Nocturne as he composed them. But as the war's shadow crept closer, suspicion did too. Neighbors began to whisper that Leon was a deserter, a spy. One evening, she'd arrived to find soldiers dragging him from the cottage. He'd resisted, not violently, but with sorrow. They called him a coward, accused him of forging papers. She never saw him again. "I waited at the lake every night for weeks," Eleanor said, tears streaming freely. "He told me if anything happened, he'd leave a sign, that the music would find a way back." Toby sat beside her, overwhelmed. The melody, the piano beneath the lake, the diary, all pieces of a man whose final years were soaked in silence. But Eleanor wasn't done. "I still remember the last section," she said, touching her chest. "He made me memorize it, said if the pages were ever lost, someone would need to carry it." With her frail fingers, she hummed the bars softly, half spoken, half sung. Toby recorded every note, watching history flow from her lips like a river unblocked after decades of stillness. Weeks later, Toby sat in the back of a small recording studio in London, watching as a symphony recorded Nocturne for the Lost in its entirety, every page restored, every note resurrected. Eleanor's voice, recorded from that hospital room, served as the final key. It was no longer a forgotten melody. It was a tribute, a revival, a reckoning. The story made headlines. Hollywood star uncovers lost composition from Wopu refugee. But Toby never gave interviews. The spotlight didn't belong to him. It belonged to Leon Four and to every voice silenced by history's convenient forgetfulness. Months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon, a public ceremony was held by the lake. A small bronze plaque was placed on the shore where the piano had once stood. It read, "In memory of Leon Four, 1919 to 1940, his music echoed through war, water, and time." A choir of young musicians performed the nocturne as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the lake. Eleanor Carradine was in the front row, holding Toby's hand. She wept through every note. Toby didn't speak that day. He didn't need to. Instead, he stepped to the edge of the lake one last time, took a single red rose, and placed it where the piano had once been buried. As he turned to leave, a soft breeze rippled across the water, and for a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, he could have sworn he heard the keys being played again, faint and ghostly. The composer had found peace, and so had Toby. If this story moved you, don't let it sink into silence. Tap the like button to honor the music that was almost lost to time. Share your thoughts or a memory that deserves to be heard in the comments below. Subscribe for more forgotten stories that echo through the lives of those we thought we knew. Because sometimes the softest notes leave the loudest legacy.